All right. I'll start this off, David and Jen. I want to thank you all for joining us here during your busy mid day time frame here for our second virtual workshop that we have here for the town of Tiburon's traffic study that we're engaging with parametrics engineering here. I want to introduce David Parisi here with Parametrics, and he'll introduce his team, and we'll get this the presentation and the workshop started. They'll have a short presentation, and then after that, we will open it up for questions and answers from the folks online. Dave, thank you.
Great, thank you, David. And it's good to see all the folks attending today. Jen Schreiber and myself, we're going to give a short presentation. And I think because of the good volume of folks we have today, we'd love to hold questions till the end. I think it may work out best that way, and we'll be happy to go back to any slides at that point. But again, we're very excited to see the attendance, and I'm sure more folks will stream in during our conversation. So as David Ishu mentioned, Parametrics, the firm Jen and I work for, has been hired by the town to conduct an infrastructure study, primarily focused on Tiburon Boulevard, but also looking at a couple arterial roadways, including Trestle Glen and Paradise Drive. And we'll talk about this study, where we're at right now, what's to come. Next slide, please. So again, our purpose is really look at the existing conditions along Highway 131, as well as identify some future needs, both for Tiburon Boulevard and Paradise Drive, where it's in and out of the town boundaries, as well as Trestle Glen. Certainly, we're going to be looking at ways to potentially reduce congestion, traffic congestion, through travel demand, traffic operations, and maybe some capacity improvements, and improve movements not only along Tiburon Boulevard, but across it as well for all modes. Next slide, please. Our team consists, again, as Parametrics. We're an 850-person planning and engineering firm that specializes in transportation. And we brought on a couple subcontractors for their specialties, including a firm called W-Trans out of Santa Rosa that's been helping us with some data analysis, and DKS Associates, who are experts in traffic signal operations. And these are firms that we're relying on for, again, some input and some ideas for recommendations. Next slide, please. There's been an advisory committee that we are reporting to and has given us feedback throughout the process. And you can see all the members here. It does include 2 members from the Town Council of Tiburon, member from Tiburon's Post, which is a Parks and Open Space and Trails Commission, member from Belvedere's City Council. We also are coordinating with the Joint Powers Agency for the Yellow Bus Program, the Transportation Authority of Marin, and Caltrans, because Highway 131, of course, is a state facility, and there's also some plans that are underway by the state that we are reviewing and considering as part of our efforts. Next slide, please. Here's a map of our study area, that what we're looking at, and it really is, like I mentioned before, focused on Tiburon Boulevard or 131 within Tiburon's town limits, as well as those little green lines that you can see on Trestle Glen Boulevard. And there's 2 pieces of Paradise Drive that are in and out of Tiburon that we're also paying attention to. So again, the major arterials to look at existing conditions and potential future opportunities. Next slide, please. At the end of the day, what we're tasked with is to come up with what is being called a Transportation Infrastructure Action Plan, which will identify some really early action things that can be done on these streets, as well as longer term recommendations that perhaps are going to take a lot more coordination and or funding to alleviate some of the congestion, improve multimodalism along these corridors. These bullets on the bottom here are just some of the things we are considering. We are definitely, as I mentioned before, looking at how the intersections and the traffic signals work. Does it make sense in some places to add some capacity by doing some lane additions or widening of the street. There are safety concerns, and we've been on a big inventory on that. Jen will talk about it along all these roadways, not just for drivers, but pedestrians and bicyclists as well. Transit, not just for buses, and public buses and yellow school buses, but also ferries to and from San Francisco primarily. And when we talk about active transportation, what we mean there are pedestrians and cyclists and people rolling. What can be done to enhance some of the opportunities there and maybe try to get more people out of their cars, but also improve safety. And of course, we're also looking at the schools. We've actually spent quite a bit of time looking at all 3 public schools and the private school in the area, trying to understand traffic to and from and some of the routes and some of the opportunities for improvements for travel at school areas. I'm now going to turn over to my partner, Jen, to walk us through some of the existing conditions and some of the things we've been finding out.
Thanks, David. So yeah, I will be going over some of our existing conditions findings. For any of the folks who are at the in-person workshop, a lot of this might sound the same, but we wanted to make sure that we had a lot of avenues open to share this information with the public and folks who might not have been able to attend the previous workshop. So I'll start off by going over some of the information that we found about congestion. So we wanted to take a deep dive into congestion on Tiburon Boulevard throughout the day. This is the main thoroughfare, a very important roadway. So we wanted to really get a good understanding about what's going on when and in which direction. So this slide here shows a number of diagrams of Tiburon Boulevard in the inbound direction. So going towards downtown Tiburon, the reds and oranges are more congestion and the blues and purple are less. So we see that inbound traffic tends to be the worst in the morning, although there is congestion in the afternoon. Approaching Trestle Glen is particularly a major bottleneck as the 2 through lanes here consolidate into 1 through lane and 1 left turn lane. Although there's also congestion past that, particularly approaching Avenida Miraflores. Congestion typically eases east of Avenida Miraflores as traffic is closer to free-flowing speeds during other parts of the day, but we do still see congestion further east at times throughout the day. Next, we have outbound congestion, so going towards the highway, and the outbound direction typically has longer and more severe bottlenecks compared to inbound. So you can see there's a lot more of those reds and oranges on these diagrams here. During the peaks, traffic can be congested all the way down to Lyford Drive. We really see the worst congestion during the morning commute, and then there's sort of a prolonged period in the afternoon that corresponds with school and evening commutes. Afternoon congestion tends to be worse in the morning. It does tend to clear up once vehicles are west of Trestle Glen. We also took a look at vehicle volume, so how many vehicles are just passing through Tiburon Boulevard. We did traffic counts at 3 locations. So the pinks on these charts are a location just east of Blackfield. The greens are west of Avenida Miraflores, and the orange is east of Lyford. So on the left, we have typical weekday volumes, and we can see that throughout the week, vehicle volumes, weekday as well as weekend, vehicle volumes really tend to be higher on the further western segments of Tiburon Boulevard. And during a typical weekday, Tiburon Boulevard generally experiences a pronounced morning peak around 8 a.m. And this is followed by an afternoon plateau and then a gradual decline in vehicle volumes. I will note that this does differ at our location east of Lyford. There we tended to see that the peak was more in the middle of the day. On the weekend, so that chart on the right, we see that the peak tends to be later in the day compared to the weekday, and volumes typically stay more elevated through the evening, and then there's sort of a longer taper compared to the weekday. As part of this study, we are looking at traffic signals, including timing and equipment along Tiburon Boulevard. We can see that there is wireless communication present at a number of intersections. And during the site visits, when we were actually going out and taking a look at the equipment and how it was operating, we did observe, again, this afternoon congestion in the westbound direction, as well as the queuing at intersections. So we've been just collecting a lot of data on the queuing, on the signals that we can then use to make our recommendations going forward. And we will also be thinking about the implications of the proposed PHVs, particularly at Ned's Way. We wanted to get a sense of what types of trips and what are the different characteristics of the trips that are being made in the area to get a sense of how people are traveling and how we could use this again going forward to making recommendations. So this chart shows weekday vehicle trip distances. So this is for trips originating in Tiburon and Belvedere. They could be trips that do not travel on Tiburon Boulevard, but just trips originating in either the city of Belvedere or the town of Tiburon. And we noticed that a good amount of these, so about 27% of these vehicle trips are shorter than 4 miles. So these could potentially be trips that could be shifted towards active mode or transit. However, on the other side of that, almost 30% of trips are longer than 15 miles and 9% are longer than 25 miles. So this does make mode shift more difficult for these longer types of trips. We looked at trip destinations as well. So these maps show trip destinations for the weekday on the left and weekend on the right for trips, this time particularly along Tiburon Boulevard. The darker and sort of higher shapes indicate the higher amounts of trips that are having those areas as destinations. And we can see that during the weekdays, trips tend to be spread throughout the bay, up towards Santa Rosa, out in the East Bay, down in the South Bay as well. While on the weekend, trips they're still spread out, but they tend to be a little more confined to Marin County and parts of San Francisco. We did notice that during both the weekday and the weekend, San Francisco and Oakland airports are consistent important destinations for these trips that are being made. And then we also conducted an observational study to, again, just get more information on the types of trips being made. So we observed traffic from 3 to 6 p.m. on a typical Thursday from a location just west of Avenida Miraflores, and approximated trip characteristics based on the types of vehicles we were seeing and the number of people in them. So, this is a little bit of an art and a science, but we use these observations to try and gain as accurate a picture as possible of what these types of trips were. So we saw throughout the observation period, that passenger vehicles, particularly single occupancy vehicles, really predominated. These were at the peak from 3:30 to 4 p.m. They made up 68% of all observed trips. In the outbound direction, single occupancy vehicles never dipped below 59% of the vehicles that we were seeing. And inbound, they stayed around 65%. We also noticed a fair number of multi-occupancy private vehicle trips, so trips with more than one person in them. And this started out relatively as a small share of the vehicles we were seeing at the closer to 3 p.m. So at the beginning of our observation period, this was really only about 10% of vehicles, but by the end, it was almost 30%. So really ramped up there towards the evening. School trips, which are the orangey yellow color you can see on the chart, peaked around 3:15 to 3:30. And at that point, they made up 24% of all of the observed trips. We did see that more outbound school trips were observed compared to inbound school trips. And at the peak for outbound specifically, they made up 38% of trips from 3:15 to 3:30. And then the other notable type of trip I will mention is contractor and service vehicles. The peak for these types of vehicles was 16% of all observed traffic from 3:45 to 4. And particularly noting the outbound traffic, they accounted for 27% of all observed outbound vehicles. So now we can talk a little bit about safety. We analyzed the 5 most recent years of crash data available from the state, which was 2018 to 2022. And during this time, there were 35 collisions in the entire study area. None of these were serious injury or fatal collisions. 66% resulted just in property damage only, while the remaining 34% resulted in a less severe injury. We saw that there was one reported bicycle collision, which was up there on Paradise Drive, that purple dot in the left map. And then there was one reported pedestrian collision as well, the red dot over there on Tiburon, east of Del Mar Middle School. In terms of the primary collision factor, so sort of what caused these crashes, 40% of the collisions that we saw, excuse me, resulted from unsafe speed. And then other top causes were improper turning, particularly at the Tressor Glen intersection, as well as unsafe starting or backing. As a part of our sort of existing conditions phase, we have also been digging into the Caltrans State Route 131 Capital Preventive Maintenance Project. This project extends outside of our study area, but does incorporate Tiburon Boulevard within the study area. And the project aims to improve the serviceability and ride quality of the roadway. It does this through a number of different improvements, which you can see on the slide here, including drainage, pavement rehabilitation, and constructing of bikeways along Tiburon Boulevard. So the project is still in development. The final design phase is scheduled for summer of 2025, and the project would not be completed until winter 2027. But this is an important project that is obviously happening right in the middle of our study area. So we have been and are continuing to coordinate with Caltrans to assess any impacts on congestion that this project may have on Tiburon Boulevard. So an important part of our existing conditions phase has been listening to the public through meetings like this, as well as through our community survey. So we conducted a community survey. It was available online during December and January. It actually just closed, so we're still digging into the data, but I wanted to share a little bit of what we've been finding so far. So first off, we got over 750 responses, which was really great. So if you took the survey, thank you. We were really pleased with the participation that we got in the survey. In terms of who's taking the survey, most people are residents of either Tiburon or Belvedere, so 89%. 18% visited the area for either shopping or dining, and 11% are workers. And I will note that people were able to select multiple responses for this question. So for example, it could be a resident of Belvedere who goes dining, goes to restaurants in Tiburon or something like that. So the numbers will not add up to 100%. In terms of how people get around, most people do drive daily. So 66% of the survey respondents drive every day. 32% walk every day as well, which is really great. We weren't able to, at this stage, know if these are recreational trips or walking to destinations, but we did see a high percentage of respondents who are walkers. And then a quarter of respondents also bike weekly. Again, that could be for recreation or to get to destinations, and 8% use transit weekly. Some of the questions that we asked were around people's concerns around Tiburon Boulevard. And we asked this for folks driving as well as for folks who are walking and rolling. For driving, there was a clear concern that stood out among the rest. So 92% of respondents are concerned about congestion and traffic delays on Tiburon Boulevard. And then other concerns such as distracted driving, poor road condition, and speeding vehicles were also significant, but really folks are interested in alleviating congestion. When we asked the question of people who are walking and rolling, we got sort of more varied responses. So 36% were concerned about a lack of continuous sidewalks on the boulevard. And then 29% each were concerned with challenging intersections and speeding cars, and then lack of bike facilities also rose to the top. So we are currently conducting a full-scale analysis of these results, so we'll have more in-depth information soon, but this does give a good overview of what some of the main concerns are from the community, and this will be really valuable information for moving forward with the project. So in that vein, I'm going to wrap things up right now, and we can move over to a question and answer and comment period. We really want to hear from you. at this meeting or elsewhere. So please tell us about your mobility challenges and opportunities that you see for Tiburon Boulevard, Trestle Glen, and Paradise. You can, raise your hand and we'll call on you. If you don't want to speak in front of the group, feel free to put something in the chat. We also encourage you to visit the project website for updates about the project going forward. And you can feel free to email David Ishu, again, with questions or comments, and his email address is right here on the screen. So I'm going to stop talking now, and we can turn it over to some question and answer.
Or not even questions, it's observations, things that people experience in the quarter, no matter how you're traveling along or across. Again, we want to hear from folks. This is still in the exploratory stage. Jen, it looks like Bruce King has his hand up.
Bruce, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, I live off Trestle Glen, and to me, it seems like a very unique situation based on the grades and the slope, and a crossing guard who monitors the signals at the two choke hold times, both in the morning and the afternoon. I'm just curious when you may have some recommendations regarding how you would deal with that situation. I listened to the prior virtual meeting, and I'm joined today, and I've heard you review all the facts, and I'm just curious when the residents or the town may actually see some results from your work.
Great, Bruce, that's a good question. So we're finishing up the first phase of our study, which is the data collection, review of congestion, and whatnot. We're entering the phase now where we're starting to do some traffic forecasts, understand what the future has in store, and then some recommendations. It's going to be May or June when we'll have some draft recommendations that we'll be providing to the advisory committee in the town. So around that time frame. And there will also be an outreach event there then to share that information.
Thank you. Could I comment on another totally unrelated subject? If you could pull up your initial slide of the aerial view.
Yes, let me get that up.
Okay, that's the view. I doubt if this is a secret to anybody in the town, but look how much available space is available in Blackie's pasture to increase the number of parking spaces in the side lot. I know it's been discussed for construction parking, but I don't know whether it's really been discussed how to easily increase the amount of parking at Blackie's pasture. Just a comment. Thank you.
Thanks. Jane, you have your hand up. You can go ahead.
Yeah, thank you all. And I realize how much work goes into this. You mentioned on a Thursday you did traffic counts in both direction, and I sort of have a data wonky question, which is about trying to find the ground truth of traffic counts from INREX and Streetlight, because I think I'm aware that they can no longer use the Apple data because of privacy concerns with the GPS unless people have opted in. So I'm wondering with those traffic counts, how you make sure that you're getting the accuracy that you need. Thank you.
I'll start and then Jen can chime in. Jane's, we've talked before, you're very aware of some of the big data sources that are out there like Streetlight and Replica. There's information out there where we can get thousands of data points, including Interx too, that's very accurate as far as how congestion occurs or travel sheds and whatnot. The data that Jen showed, however, for Tiburon Boulevard near Avenida Miraflores was actually manually collected by Jen and another member of our staff by observing traffic in each direction at different days. And Jen, maybe you could talk about, again, the approach there. It's not exact, like you said, it's an art as well, but looking at the vehicle types and markings on them and the number of occupants and the direction and whatnot. You want to chime in on there?
Yeah, so we've been using a lot of different data sources for this study. Like you said, we have been using big data sources, which are great for getting sort of, higher level insights into trends. And then, as David said, we've also been doing a lot of work on the ground. So myself and another colleague were literally standing on the side of the road for 3 hours on a Thursday evening, counting vehicles and, talking into our phones, recording what we were seeing, to, really see what was going on the ground. And then we've also, we have done traffic counts. We collected tube counts on those 3 different segments of Tiburon Boulevard during the course of a week. And then we also had we did turning movement counts at a number of intersections as well. So, eyes on the ground, recording what was going on there. So we are able to sort of, see what's going on the ground, make sure that what we're seeing from these big data sources makes sense in relation to that, and make sure that everything's sort of jiving together.
So are there sensors actually that you can pick up in addition to the cell phone information as well as standing there on the side of the street?
Well,
sorry. Yeah, David, do you want to?
You mean Jane sensors to count traffic?
Correct.
Yeah. So that there are loop detectors and video detectors that are on the corner at the signals. Those are not being used to count traffic levels currently. We have set down some tube counts, and you may have driven over those at 3 different locations. So we did have some sensors deployed as part of this study to count the traffic in each direction, and in 15 minutes increments over the course of a day.
All right, I'm noticing that we're getting some questions in the chat, so maybe we can do some of these, and then I also see some folks with hands raised. So Bill is asking, he's wondering what the expected impact of self-driving cars will be looking out 10 to 15 years. If trip levels stay the same, is congestion expected to be better or worse? I believe there's another question sort of looking to the future as well. Have you taken into account the 639 new units that are mandated to be planned for the next 8 years?
Yeah, we're doing some research on self-driving cars and whatnot, if that makes a difference, plus or minus. We are also looking into we have to look at forecast future conditions as part of this study, and we're projecting out to 2050. And as part of that, we are considering both the housing elements from town of Tiburon and the city of Belvedere. We're also looking at historic growth rates, so we will be addressing that, and that's what we're doing right now. Actually, is coming up with what are those future forecast conditions. Very good question.
All right, and there's a question, is there a 2-lane roundabout being considered at Trestle Glen?
Well, I'll just say there's a roundabout being considered. We're going to take a look and see if a roundabout at that location, a single lane or 2 lanes completely around it, or 2 lanes in the westbound direction can work. It's an iterative process. There's a lot of private right-of-way in the corners of that intersection, but we are laying it out, and we're going to be assessing what a roundabout could do. We're also going to be looking at some other enhancements, retaining a signal and seeing if additional lane in a certain direction or both directions could help as well. So yeah, stay tuned. That has been requested by a number of people. And we certainly have identified that as a choke point. So we're looking at the Tiburon Boulevard between Blackie's pasture and all the way past Avenida as a potential focus area.
All right, thanks. Let's go to some of these raised hands. Paul, you can go ahead and unmute.
Sure, thanks. I just want, my comments actually fall in line with exactly what was just said. So I, been here almost 20 years. The congestion point really is the Trestle Glen intersection, and it all backs up from there. So the roundabout at that intersection seems to make the most sense. Understand the logistics that have to be had to make that happen. But I was on a board when I lived in Vail, Colorado. Similar issue, just like with school time, people going to school, people coming out of school. We had a ski mountain that people would come in the morning and leave in the afternoon. And we did a full study, and the 2-lane roundabout where there used to be an intersection with the lights increased car capacity by 3,000 an hour. So, and we studied that for years before we implemented it, and it improved congestion dramatically during those peak times. And so so I'm full on board with, if there's a way working with Caltrans to make that happen, that seems to be the best. I've heard of discussions about roundabouts in other intersections, but I think the backup really stems from Trestle Glen, and a roundabout anywhere else really just, you're going to get backed up there anyways. So that's my thought there. Coming inbound, if there's a way to widen the lane at the Mia Flores, what backs up that after Trestle Glen is a lot of people trying to turn left for Del Mar in the morning, which backs up the line. So if there's a way to make that left turn lane a little bit longer so cars can get pass through and keep going straight, that's another one. And since I'm at that intersection, Caltrans, when they redo the repaving, really need to redo that pedestrian walkway that takes you off that intersection over into the pedestrian pathway, because it's completely rotted and needs to be repaved. But those are just some of the things that I've noticed that would have dramatic effects. The only concern is if you put a big roundabout at Trestle Glen, are you just pushing the backup all the way to the shopping center light? Because now you're flowing way more traffic through, but at least alleviates people getting out of the single lane, and 2 lanes are better than one. But those are my thoughts.
Hey, Paul, were those roundabouts you were talking about in Colorado, Vail or Avon area?
Yeah, they were in Vail.
Okay.
Yeah.
So roundabouts, again, we are going to consider it. There's a lot of issues with right of way, and as you mentioned, if there's a backup from a signal, how roundabout works. So yeah. So again, stay tuned. We're sketching stuff out, and they're going to be evaluating the potential.
All right, Matthew, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, thanks. So I was wondering if you could say anything more about what you've learned in your communications with Caltrans about the Caltrans project on this route. Specifically, if you've learned any information about what type of vertical delineators Caltrans is planning to protect the protected bike lanes from the roadway, and if there's any consideration of reducing the speed limit on Highway 131. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, great questions. We've been in coordination with the state. They have finished what they call their 30 or 35% plans, and they're now underway with the next progression, which is 65% plans. And we will see those shortly. It's our understanding for all Tiburon blower from 101 to Blackie's pasture. What is being proposed is to take the most of those 8-foot shoulders that are along the roadway and restripe them into buffered bike lanes. So there's a bike lane, but there's a painted buffer of a couple feet wide. And within that buffer, that is the question I think you're asking, what would go there. Our understanding is that the consideration at this point are some vertical flexible posts that would provide the separation of added visibility where cars could pull into if there is an emergency and whatnot. But that's our understanding right now. We're going to be doing some further assessment with them. They're also between East Strawberry and just to the east of that, they're looking at what's called a Class 1 facility, which would allow pedestrians as well, because there is no sidewalk on the south side of the street. And that, our understanding, would be barrier separated. But again, we haven't seen the recent plans yet, but we're going to look at that. Part of our scope of work is to, again, understand that better, and then also assess, are there impacts to traffic? And what's the safety aspects for the bicyclists and pedestrians using those facilities? Some more to come. David, I saw you just came back on. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, Dave, you're absolutely right about that. And yeah, thank you.
Hey, Jen, it looks like there's some more chat.
Yeah.
Some chat.
So yeah, we just got a question on the 131 bike lanes that are on the right and left. Have you looked at how these would impact the workable width of the road from Blackie's entrance to Trestle Glen, including Jefferson?
Not yet, but thank you for that question, Chuck. We'll take a look at that once we see the plans. Oh, Matthew, you asked a question about speed limits. Sorry about that.
No.
That's also something we'll look into. Typically, speed limits are set based on the prevailing speeds and measurements on the roadway. And often, I would imagine that after the project is implemented, the state would conduct what's called a engineering traffic survey to see if the speed limits are still appropriate or if they should be lowered, for instance, from 45 to 40 or less. So again, we'll inquire about that, but thanks for that question. We'll look into that.
Right. So we'd love to hear more from you all about how you travel in the area. Do you typically drive, bike, walk? Do you, plan your travel times around congestion? These meetings are to hear more about how, everyone on the ground is actually using. We want to hear your real life experiences, anything you're having trouble with, any challenges, but also, what would you hope for this corridor and how would you like to see it improved? So any thoughts, please just raise your hand and we'd love to hear from you.
Hi guys. Couldn't figure out how to click raise your hand. But is there I really like the idea of a roundabout in general, and I have unfamiliar with how roundabouts handle pedestrians crossing through crosswalks, and just wondering if you can speak to how such a thing is solved, or maybe in this case in particular, but even generally.
Yeah, that's a great question. Roundabouts have evolved quite a bit in North America, and they're much different than they used to be 10 years ago. It's really important on a modern roundabout to provide a separating island so pedestrians can cross the leg twice. They cross into a refuge area, into a splitter island, and they can cross again. The challenge can be if there's multiple lanes in a roundabout, you know, it's the single lane roundabouts or crossing one lane roundabouts have proven to be pretty safe. When you get into multiple lanes, of course, there can be a multiple threat condition. One car may stop, one may not. So there's things that that are starting to be used, including flashing beacons and traffic pedestrian hybrid beacons that flash. There's different techniques, but I'll be honest, it's more challenging when you have a multi-lane roundabout for pedestrians. So sometimes it's really about what speeds you have vehicles entering the roundabout, how you can slow them down, what types of countermeasures such as beacons and whatnot can be considered. Safer if it's a single lane, as I mentioned. And then there's also the idea of moving or doing some grade separated types of crossings. So these are real concerns and things we are considering. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic and bike traffic at Trestle Glen. So we're very aware of that. Really good question.
Great. And I appreciate that very much. A follow-up is in the roundabout scenario, I was doing some beautiful napkin drawings myself of ideas, and it kind of dawned on me if there were a roundabout for at least the inbound direction coming into town, could there be just a lane that is dedicated as a pass-by lane because doesn't have to be any traffic that has to peel off to the right-hand side? Could there be a pass-through lane that is added as a part of the roundabout concept that just allows flow at all times straight through to connect Tiburon Boulevard and doesn't even have to enter the roundabout?
I would love to see your sketch. Your napkin sketch.
It's long.
Yeah, no, but you do see these on like three-legged roundabouts like you're talking about that has a bypass lane. Pedestrians still got to cross that. So
Yep.
again, how to accommodate that is important. So, you know, we are again looking at existing and future traffic levels, and we'll be assessing if a roundabout makes sense, how big or how small could it be? How many lanes does it need to be? Could it be 2 lanes in one direction, one in the other direction? There's a lot of factors, or can there be a bypass lane? So, great questions.
Understood. A lot of napkins.
If I can just comment, the whole one of the purposes of the roundabout is to have the bypass lane. So one lane just goes straight through, the other one would actually turn left into Trestle Glen, or if you need to make a U-turn, you stay in the roundabout and go back out where you came, right? And then the issue with that location is the drainage, and you do have, like any roundabout would have to be elevated above the drainage there. So that's the biggest complexity I see, is the height you would need to put a roundabout there and it would probably butt up right up to where the old railroad track crossing is type stuff. So it would be a fairly good size roundabout.
You're right about that. And what we are also doing is looking at the right-of-way that's within the state right-of-way and trying to respect that and see if any improvements would need to go outside of that right-of-way. As Paul mentioned, the vertical elements and transition in time, conforming back into a roadway. So we're excited about these ideas, and we'll be reporting back with some concepts and operational analysis.
We got a question from Angela. Have we studied having Reed and Bel Air schools changing to K-5, creating neighborhood schools that are more friendly for students to walk and bike to school?
That's a question that has come up before. Obviously, it's maybe a little bit higher level than what we're looking at as a Reed School District question. I understand there's a lot of history there. To be honest, I'm not sure how to touch that one. Just with the neighborhood schools and whatnot, but it's certainly been brought up before, and it's something we may take a look at and say and try to estimate what level of traffic relief, something like that could provide, because we do have the traffic numbers. We understand the modes to school. We certainly also understand that if a child goes from K to 12, or I mean, K to 8, throughout the school district, they'll be at 3 different schools. And there's always at 2 of those schools at least be commuting to and from. So sensitive one. But again, I think it's come up enough that we'll probably do some napkin drawings ourselves to understand what kind of relief could that really provide, just so it's out there. But again, I'm not a school official. I think it gets into other issues like how you configure a school, classrooms, lots of other things that we're not knowledgeable about, that we'd have to learn more about, to be honest with you. Maybe somebody else can chime in here on that item.
All right, and we got a comment from Leela on saying that there's actually, this may be a question or maybe a comment, but potential to add pedestrian bridge from the height of the old trestle and blockies to the mini park on the other side. Pedestrian bike bridge could be a spectacular architectural addition that reflects our town's history. Thanks for that comment.
Yeah, I haven't seen that before. Thank you for that. And along those lines, we've also heard of a recommendation to do some type of grade separation at Avenida. We know that there's a ton of kids going back and forth to middle school in the morning, afternoon. There's a crossing guard that's very active at that location, stopping traffic. So that's also been a potential grade separation concept that has been floated.
Right. We're happy to take more questions or comments. If there are none for now, though, maybe we can turn it back to David from the town to say a few words to wrap up.
Yeah, no, I want to thank you, David and Jen, for providing some virtual workshop and update to the residents. I'm very happy to see the participants that attended this meeting. You're doing a fantastic job in data collection. I know it's very tough doing what you're doing here with this study because the problem we have here is just the saturation and not enough right of way. And we're dealing with Caltrans as well, that has jurisdiction over Tiburon Boulevard. Any recommendations that you bring forth to town council here in the next 4 or 5 months will also have to be vetted through Caltrans. So I'm excited that we had our first meeting with them a couple weeks ago, and that you're in close contact with Caltrans moving forward. And once again, we are many steps ahead of their design of 131. So what recommendations we're going to bring forward, and anything that Parametrics does see here that may pose, be a benefit for the town and for Caltrans, they'll be aware of it before their final design is in place. So with that being said, please reach out to me. My email's out there. Any questions you have or comments regarding this study, I will forward over to Parametrics, and we'll get you an answer, and we'll share your thoughts with them moving forward. We do have a web page dedicated on the town's website just for the traffic study. We're going to be putting up more information on there, but we're looking at, town council draft recommendation sometime in April, May. We're looking at also possibly one more in-person workshop coming up later on in April as well. But that doesn't mean that that's the only time you can contact us. You can contact me anytime with any of your suggestions, and those will be forwarded over to Parametrics to be looked at. So yeah, thank you very much again for attending. And with that being said, if there's any more questions or texts from anybody, please send them over right now. If not, we can end this about 9 minutes early and get you back to your day. Thank you.